Why did they still look through her like she was furniture? The mess hall was loud that morning, boots scraping, trays clattering, laughter bouncing off steel and sandbags. Claire moved quietly between tables, stacking empty cups, collecting torn wrappers, acting as though the noise didn't press against her skull. The Marines didn't pause when she passed. Some nodded out of habit, most didn't bother. She learned not to expect acknowledgement. Attention was a luxury, and she'd long since stopped needing it. But one face did glance up, brief, uncertain, then gone again. He didn't recognize her, not really. None of them did. They still called her the helper girl. She wiped down a table with a damp cloth, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back tight. Dusk crept in through the seams of the canvas walls. The smell of burnt coffee drifted from the urn. Across the room, two lance corporals joked loudly about a busted Humvee. Someone imitated an officer's radio voice, and the nearby crowd erupted with laughter. No one mentioned the sandstorm last night, or the way she guided 3 men through zero visibility to the right tunnel by memory alone. They didn't know she hadn't slept yet. One of the Marines bumped a chair with his knee and muttered without looking at her, "Hey, wipe that side too." She did without a word. She didn't mind the tasks. The folding of blankets, the refilling of canteens, the stitching of uniforms, the quiet listening when someone couldn't talk to another Marine about the nightmares. What clawed at her sometimes wasn't the work. It was how they assumed that was all she was. But she let them think that. It made moving through the shadows easier. In the far corner, 2 medics were sorting bandages. One of them, tall, freckled, always chewing on something, glanced at her briefly. "You done with those racks?" he asked. "I'll finish in 5 minutes," she said, voice soft, steady. He gave a distracted nod. He didn't know that his medical kit was restocked last night because she'd watched him run out of chest seals during a drill and made a note. She moved to the side room beside the dining area, where a stack of boxes waited. Supply runs came in 2 days late this time, and everything was short. She opened a crate of gauze and began sorting. Outside, the sun was rising over the ridgeline, orange bleeding into pale blue. The base hummed with routine, radio traffic, engines warming, gear checks, distant dogs barking at nothing. Patrol briefing would begin soon. She didn't join briefings. Volunteers weren't invited. She placed rolls of gauze into a bin, arranging them by width. Her fingertips brushed against the edge of her pocket. The silver tag rested there, warm from body heat. She didn't take it out. Footsteps approached, heavy ones. "Hey, Claire," a voice called. She looked up. Sergeant Willis leaned in the doorway, helmet tucked under his arm. He was tall, mid-30s, face lined with fatigue and caffeine. "You see our coffee packets anywhere? We're out again." She nodded toward the shelf behind her, top left. He stepped in, grabbed a few without thanks, and turned to leave. But at the door, he hesitated. He scratched his cheek. "You hear about what happened to 2nd Platoon yesterday? Took some fire on the South Road. One guy lost a chunk of his calf." She paused mid-sort. "He's stable." "Yeah, tourniquet saved him. One of the new guys applied it, got it on fast." He blinked, almost surprised as he said it. Didn't think he had it in him. Claire gave a faint nod. "Good." The sergeant left. The door swung shut behind him. She remembered when that same Marine failed 3 practice runs on tourniquets last week, hands shaking, fumbling with the windlass. She'd shown him how to anchor the strap one evening while pretending to organize linens. He hadn't noticed she was teaching him. She returned to the gauze. 15 minutes later, she stepped out into the yard. The air was cold, sharp. Engines revved near the motor pool. Marines gathered near the comms tent, helmets strapped, rifles slung. She saw Martinez among them, tall, dark hair cropped close. He was laughing at a joke another soldier made, but the laugh didn't reach his eyes. He hadn't slept well either. She could tell by the way he rolled his left shoulder, an injury he never reported. He didn't see her. She crossed the yard toward the aid station. The sun hit her face and she squinted, reaching into her pocket briefly. Her fingers traced the worn letters etched into the metal of the tag. Standing where no one dared was easier when no one expected anything of you. Inside the aid station, 2 cots were empty, sheets folded, IV stands resting in the corner like silent sentries. The medic on duty, Corporal Heyward, didn't look up from his clipboard. "Grab me the saline if you're over there," he said. She reached into a cabinet and placed 2 bags on the table next to him. He muttered thanks without taking his eyes off the forms. She checked supply drawers out of habit, needles stocked, gauze low, pain meds half gone, bandage tape low again. She'd make a list. In the back corner, a corporal sat on a cot with his boot off, socks stained. A shallow cut across his ankle. He glared at the bandage she was applying. "I could have done it myself," he muttered. "I know," she said. He didn't respond. She finished wrapping his ankle and stood. She didn't say he'd tied his last bandage too tight and cut off circulation. Some lessons were quieter when learned by experience. A voice crackled over the intercom outside. "Convoy rolling in 10. She glanced at the door. She wasn't cleared for outbound movement. No vest, no rifle, no plate carrier. Civilians stayed behind wire. That was the rule. But she remembered the tone of the radio yesterday when contact was called. The way everyone paused mid-sentence. 3 months ago, she would have stayed behind. 3 months ago, she still thought she could outrun the past by burying it in silence. But silence did nothing for the dying. She walked to the small storage room at the rear of the aid station and took her medical backpack off the hook. The straps were worn smooth where her fingers usually gripped them. She checked inside by instinct: tourniquets, gauze, trauma shears, chest seals, airway tubes, IV lines, pressure dressings, gloves. Everything in its place. A shadow appeared in the doorway. "You heading somewhere?" It was Corporal Heyward, raising an eyebrow. "Just restocking," she said. He didn't press, though his eyes lingered a bit longer than normal. Outside, engines rumbled. Boots hit metal steps. Radio chatter filled the space between breaths. Claire tucked the backpack strap over her shoulder and stepped into the sun. No one stopped her. She moved toward the perimeter, not quickly, not nervously, just walking like someone with a job no one questioned. A truck door slammed. She looked toward the convoy forming near the gate. Martinez climbed into the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. He tightened the strap on his plate carrier and adjusted his rifle. A lieutenant barked final checks. Laughter rippled through the group as someone joked about missing breakfast again. The mood was falsely calm. She kept walking until she reached the low wall beside the gate. She stopped there, not too close, not drawing notice. A gate guard glanced at her. "You're not on manifests." "I know," she said. He shrugged and turned away. Everyone assumed she was waiting for something: supplies, paperwork, a signal. She blended in with the noise, the dust, the expectation that she wouldn't do anything unpredictable. The convoy rolled out. Engines roared, kicking up dirt. Claire watched the vehicles pass, eyes tracking the rear tires until they were swallowed by the road cutting through the valley. She stood there for a long moment, the backpack weighing on her shoulders, the sun warming the back of her neck. Then she turned and went back inside the wire. By mid-morning, the base settled again. Training drills resumed. Radios buzzed. The chaplain walked by carrying a box of donated books. A group of new arrivals hauled duffels to the temporary barracks. Claire sat at a metal table behind the aid station, sorting through expired supplies. She peeled labels off bottles, set aside anything still usable. The silver tag rested on the table beside her hand, catching the light. Why had the general looked at her pocket like that the last time she'd seen him? She pushed the thought away. That had been years ago. Another lifetime, a different name. A shadow crossed the table. She looked up. Martinez stood there, hands in his pockets, slight limp on his right leg. "You were running gear yesterday when those rounds landed by the south wall," he said, tone almost casual. She blinked once. "I was sorting litters." He tilted his head. "Funny, I saw you drag Dunley into cover." She shook her head slightly. "He stumbled. I helped him get his footing." "You shielded him from debris." He was closer to the blast. He studied her, eyes narrowed. For a moment it seemed like he might press the point, but he only said, "We're heading out again tomorrow, South Valley, same route." His jaw tightened. "Last time we were lucky." Luck, she thought, had nothing to do with it. He hesitated, then added, "The new guy Patterson keeps messing up his bandaging drills. He won't admit he's scared." She waited. "You think maybe you could, I don't know, show him how you wrapped Johnson's arm last week? So he'll listen." "No," Martinez said quietly, "so he'll believe he can do it." She looked at him a moment longer, then nodded. He let out a breath like he'd been holding it. He walked away. She watched him go. In the afternoon, she took a stack of linens to laundry. The air smelled of detergent and dust. A radio played a muffled country song in the background. The woman sorting uniforms barely glanced at her. Later, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched, Claire sat alone on a crate behind the mess hall, hands wrapped around a canteen. The sky bled orange and red, the mountains etched like teeth in the distance. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver tag. The edges were smoothed by time. The engraving was faint but readable if you knew the words. "To stand where no one dars." She held it between two fingers and closed her eyes. A sound behind her broke the quiet, someone clearing their throat. She turned. A captain stood a few feet away, arms crossed. Captain Harlow. Broad shoulders, stern expression, the kind of man who'd seen enough to stop pretending war made sense. "You were in the valley last month when those contractors got lost," he said. She stayed silent. "One of them said a small woman with a medical pack led them back through a dust storm. Couldn't see her face, just described her voice. Calm, like she'd done it 100 times." She looked back at the sky. People exaggerate what they don't understand. He studied her for a long moment. Maybe, but they usually exaggerate in the wrong direction. He shifted his weight. "You ever think some of us notice more than you think?" She didn't turn, not sure it matters. "It might," he said quietly, "sooner than you think." He walked away without another word. That night wind rattled the tent walls. Claire lay on her cot, eyes open in the dark. Distant artillery thumped somewhere far beyond the hills. A generator hummed. Someone coughed in the next tent. She reached into her pocket. The tag rested against her palm. Sleep didn't come. At dawn, voices outside jolted her upright. Radio chatter, urgent, too focused to be routine. She slipped on her boots and stepped into the cold air. A runner bolted past, yelling into a handheld. "Contact! Patrol taking heavy fire in the valley." Claire's pulse stilled, not sped. She didn't ask which patrol. She already knew. And something in her, long buried, started to rise. How many times had she sworn she would never run toward gunfire again? The shouts near the comms tent cut through the early light. Dust curled under boots as Marines scrambled for gear, weapons slung and vests half-fastened. The radio traffic bled tension into the air, short, clipped sentences, too controlled to be anything but bad. Multiple casualties pinned down ridge fire, requesting immediate support, blood loss, repeat, "We're losing him." Her heartbeat didn't spike. It just settled into something colder, deeper. A medic rushed past with his aid bag hitting his side with each stride. Another Marine cursed, fumbling with his helmet strap. Someone shouted coordinates toward the TOC, voice cracking with static and fear. Claire stood still for a moment in the courtyard, the rising sun catching on the dust around her. Her medical backpack leaned against the aid station wall where she'd left it after inventory. 10 steps away, too far and too close at the same time. She walked toward it. She didn't run. Running drew attention. She moved with purpose, deliberate, silent, as if she were responding to a minor request, not a live gun battle tearing into the valley. At the gate, 2 vehicles were already being loaded, reaction teams scrambling into seats, belts clanking, radios clipped, eyes wide but pretending calm. One corporal slammed the back doors and yelled, "Mount up." A voice barked behind her, "Where the hell is the second medic? We only got Heyward. Where? Alvarez." "Alvarez is down with fever. He's not cleared." "Then who's riding second?" No one answered. She stepped closer before she could talk herself out of it. The lieutenant in charge, face red from either adrenaline or frustration, turned and saw her standing nearby. His brows pulled together. "This area's locked down. Get back to the station." "There's no second medic," she said evenly. "Yeah, no kidding. We'll handle it. Move out of the way." "Who's treating the wounded when you reach them?" His jaw flexed. "Someone will manage. You'll need 2 hands, at least." He stared at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten he knew. For 3 slow heartbeats, no one moved. Engines idled, rattling nerves. She didn't blink. The lieutenant cursed under his breath. "Fine, get in the back. You follow orders, you hear me." She nodded once and climbed into the vehicle without looking at anyone else. The seat was metal and cold. Her pack sat between her knees, buckled and ready. Someone tossed her a Kevlar vest without properly checking the size. She slid it over her shoulders. Too big. Didn't matter. The door slammed shut. The convoy rolled. Tires chewed the dirt road as the landscape unfolded around them. Low brush, jagged rock, dust devils twisting in the wind. Claire braced herself against the wall of the vehicle as it jolted over uneven ground. The men inside said little. The hum of the engine drowned whatever thoughts they didn't dare speak. A machine gunner in the turret above yelled something into his radio, but she only caught fragments. Pinned, ridge, no visual. Suppressing. She closed her eyes briefly. The smell of diesel mixed with sweat and metal. Her fingertips brushed the edge of her pack strap. One deep breath, then another, counting each silently to 5. She had promised herself she wouldn't do this again. The road curved, narrowing between 2 rises of dark rock. The first cracks of gunfire echoed ahead, sharp, distinct, close enough to taste in the air. The gunner pivoted, scanning. A Marine muttered, "Damn it," under his breath, gripping his rifle too tight. The radio squawked. One critical femoral hit, bleeding out, need hands now. The lieutenant sitting near the front looked back at her. He didn't speak, but she saw the panic flash in his eyes before he forced it down. The convoy slowed to a stop. Not safe to go farther. The valley beyond dipped into a kill zone. Doors opened fast. Shouts overlapped. They dismounted behind the thin illusion of cover, a half-buried wall of stone and sandbags from some old outpost. Rounds cracked overhead and sparked off the rocks. She grabbed her pack and followed the nearest Marine low and fast across the dirt. The air vibrated with each shot. Dirt spat up near their boots. The lieutenant pointed. 2 down by the wrecked MRAP 30 meters out. They're pinned. We put rounds up there, you move in and treat. He wasn't talking to her. He was shouting at Heyward, the only recognized medic. Heyward nodded, pale, wiping a line of sweat from his brow. But he was already shaking. He didn't know it yet. Claire knelt behind the rock wall. She scanned the ridge. Movement. Sunlight winked off a rifle scope. She saw where fire was concentrated. She saw where someone was exposed. And she saw Martinez, crouched behind twisted metal, firing bursts uphill. His shoulder bled where shrapnel tore through his camo. She didn't hesitate. "Covering left," someone yelled. Gunfire roared to her right in response. She moved. Low run. 10 steps. Impact of rounds somewhere too close to measure. She hit the ground behind the shell of the MRAP. The metal frame shielded the wounded Marine lying half-hidden beneath the axle. Martinez glanced over, eyes briefly widening before he returned fire. The downed Marine wasn't the first she saw. There was another. 5 meters ahead, a second body slumped against a rock half in the open. Blood soaked into the dirt beneath him. His hand twitched once, then stilled. One leg bent wrong, his helmet gone. He wasn't dead, but he was fatting. She pointed at Martinez without looking at him. "Suppress that ridge," she said. He gave one short nod, no argument, no question. He fired steady bursts, not wild, not panicked, purposeful arcs forcing heads down. She crawled to the man in the open, boots sliding on gravel, her vest scraped rock. Rounds hissed past, whining into the ground. Her knees hit dirt beside him. She rolled him onto his back with practiced control. His face was gray, breath ragged. His thigh, yes, femoral, arterial spray, fast bleed. 90 seconds to death, maybe less. She spoke to him because that steadied hands. "Stay with me." He didn't answer, but his eyes flickered at the sound. She pressed her fist into the wound hard until her shoulder locked. With her other hand, she yanked a tourniquet from her pack. She looped it high on the leg, 3 inches above the pooling blood, pulling the strap with force. Windlass twist. 1 turn, 2, feel the pulse. None. Secure the clip. Her knuckles ached. She packed gauze into the hole with fast, precise pressure. 7 seconds. Seal. Wrap. She inhaled once through her nose, long and controlled. The world around her narrowed to the rise and fall of his breath. A grenade exploded on the ridge, showering dirt high above them. Marines shouted somewhere behind. She heard Martinez curse and reload. She dragged the Marine by his vest toward the MRAP. Every muscle in her back burned. She used leverage, not strength, boot heel anchoring, hips low, shoulders pulling. 2 meters. 4. 6. Martinez fired over her head, concentrating on the spot where enemy muzzle flashes had bloomed before. She pulled the man behind cover. His eyes rolled, but breath still came, shallow but there. Heyward arrived in a stumbling rush, sliding beside her. His hands hovered uncertainly. "He needs fluids," he said, voice wavering. "He needs his lung checked before you try a line," she replied sharply. "What, why?" "His lips are blue, pulse weak. Check breath sounds left side." Heyward blinked, startled into motion. He cut the Marine's vest away and pressed an ear to his chest, then swore as he heard the rattle. A ricochet or fragment must have caught him in the side. 2 injuries, time shrinking. "Occlusive dressing," she said. I don't." She grabbed a chest seal from her kit and slapped it over the entry wound, smoothing edges with her palm. She guided Heyward's shaking hands to hold it in place. "You manage his airway if he drops. I'll stabilize circulation." "But you're not." "Do it." Her tone brooked nothing. He swallowed and nodded. She stood and scanned again. Martinez had shifted position, jaw clenched, muzzle tracking movement on the ridge. His shoulder dripped blood, but he didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care. She moved back to the man in the MRAP's shadow, the first casualty. Shallow breathing, shrapnel along his arm, a graze across his temple, stable for now. She checked his tourniquet, tight enough, blood flow stopped. She went back to the second Marine. He was slipping. She pulled a pressure dressing from the pack and secured the gauze on his thigh. Every movement smooth, confident, automatic. Gunfire eased for 6 heartbeats, then roared again as enemy fighters shifted position. She tracked their fire pattern in her mind, 2 shooters, maybe 3. Angles suggested they'd flanked higher. She pointed toward the far left slope without looking up. "They've moved, one up by that dark boulder. Watch the dust trails." Martinez yelled the location to his squad. The machine gunner pivoted and unleashed a burst. Screams rose from the ridge. Whether fear or pain, no one could tell. "Gunner 1-5 advance," someone shouted. She blocked out the orders. Her world was the Marine's pulse, the gauze, the breath she counted in silent beats. More Marines rushed forward with a litter. Heyward and another soldier lifted the casualty she'd stabilized first. Two others reached for the man she just patched. She signaled where to hold him, how to angle his leg. As they loaded him, he grabbed her wrist weakly. She paused, meeting his dazed eyes. His lips moved, no sound at first then. "You weren't supposed to be." She pressed his shoulder gently. "Breathe, that's your only job." They carried him toward the vehicle. She turned to Martinez. "You're hit." "It's nothing." "Lift your arm." I said. She didn't argue. She reached for his wrist, pulled his arm up despite his glare. The wound was shallow but bleeding enough to weaken him. She cleaned it with a quick swipe, packing and wrapping it in seconds. He watched her with something unreadable in his eyes. Respect, confusion, fear, maybe all of it tangled. "How the hell do you move like that?" he muttered. She didn't answer. Someone yelled her name, Heyward calling her back to help set an IV. She slung her pack over her shoulder and followed. By the time the squad neutralized the last shooter on the ridge, the worst of the bleeding was under control. 3 wounded were loaded, 1 dead, covered with a poncho. Martinez limped toward the truck but waved away help. As they mounted up, a Marine stared at her like she was a ghost that had stepped out of rumor. Another whispered, "She shouldn't be here, but thank God she is." She climbed into the back of the vehicle last, boots coated in dust and blood. The door banged shut. The engine roared back to life. The ride to base was quieter, fewer glances, eyes that couldn't decide what they'd seen. Heyward sat across from her, still catching his breath. He looked at his hands, then at her. You trained somewhere, didn't you?" She didn't respond. He swallowed. "That tourniquet, that was textbook, better than textbook, and the chest, how did you know?" She looked past him, out the tiny window, at the ridgeline shrinking behind them. Some truths were heavy, because speaking them would make them real again. She closed her eyes instead. Back at base, the wounded were rushed into the aid station. Claire stepped down from the vehicle, her vest stained, hair stuck to her temples. Marines nearby watched her with new eyes. Whispers followed in low currents. A captain approached, face tense. "You disobeyed protocol leaving the wire." She waited. He stared at her a moment longer, then exhaled. "We'll discuss it later." He walked away without another word. Martinez limped past her toward the med bay, pausing briefly. He didn't touch her arm, didn't say thank you. He only murmured, "You saved him," before disappearing inside. She stood alone in the dust as the convoy noise faded. She knew it wasn't over. Not the whispers, not the questions. Not the part of her she'd tried to bury. Not anymore. And somewhere miles above their heads, a helicopter was already angling toward base, carrying someone she never wanted to see again. Someone who remembered the tag in her pocket. Why did the silence feel louder than the gunfire? The debrief tent buzzed with restrained voices, low and tense. Marines moved in and out, brushing past tables stacked with radio logs and iced water jugs. A generator rumbled outside, blending with the steady thud of helicopter blades somewhere behind the ridge. Dust drifted through seams in the canvas walls, settling over everything like a faded memory no one wanted to confront. Claire stood near the corner, away from the clusters of conversation. She dropped off her medical pack in the aid station, cleaned the dried blood from her hands in a dented sink, then walked here without knowing exactly why. She was supposed to wait for someone to question her, about protocol, about leaving the wire, about doing what no civilian should have done. But no one had said a word yet. A medic passed her, muttering to another Marine about blood loss percentages and unstable vitals. Someone else mentioned a medevac launch, voice cracking at the end of the sentence. The injured were alive for now. That was all that mattered. But the room felt wrong. Too many eyes flicked toward her then away before she could meet them. Too many conversations dropped half a second too late. Too many unasked questions pressed into the air. She didn't shift her weight or cross her arms. Stillness made her less visible. That had always been the trick. A staff sergeant walked by, glancing at her vest still hanging open, dust smudged across the collar. He opened his mouth like he might say something, then closed it and kept moving. She inhaled slowly. The metallic smell of spent brass and diesel clung to everything. Near the center table, Captain Harlow reviewed a map with two lieutenants. They traced finger lines across the valley sketch, marking sniper positions and impact points. One of the lieutenants spoke with quiet frustration. They flanked higher than expected. We were watching the lower ridgeline, didn't anticipate overlapping fields. Two of our guys would have bled out if med support hadn't pushed forward, the other added. Harlow didn't look up from the map. They were lucky. Luck again. Claire kept her face impassive. Voices rose briefly near the entry flap, then dropped as someone new stepped inside. A lieutenant colonel, sharp uniform, brows pinched, surveyed the tent. His gaze landed on Claire for half a moment. She waited for the inevitable order, the reprimand, the lecture on protocol and liability. It didn't come. He turned away and spoke to Harlow in a clipped tone Claire couldn't quite hear. Across the room, Martinez entered on a bandaged shoulder, face tight with something more than pain. He spoke with one of his squad mates, eyes occasionally drifting in her direction but not staying there. He didn't approach. He didn't have to. The shift in his expression earlier, the moment the pack hit the dirt and she stepped into the open, had changed something he hadn't yet named. A corporal shoved through the flap, breathless. "Sir, incoming flight in 10. They want reception ready on the tarmac." Someone swore. Another said, "Already, they don't waste time." Captain Harlow straightened. "General Hartley's arriving with staff." They moved up his inspection. That name carved a line through the tension. Hartley. 4 stars, career hardened, favored for something bigger than a field posting, known for remembering names and debts. Claire's fingers brushed the inside of her pocket before she stopped herself. No, not here, not now. She stepped toward the exit, ready to melt back to the aid station, maybe disappear into laundry or inventory. But a corporal blocked her path by accident, arms full of folded maps. She slipped past him and into the light. The sun had climbed higher. Heat shimmered off the metal roofs and sandbags. The courtyard was a blur of preparation, soldiers straightening uniforms, clearing trash, lining vehicles with practiced speed. Formality, even in dust. She started toward the rear tents, head down, but a voice stopped her. "Claire." Not loud, not demanding, steady. She turned. Captain Harlow stood a few steps away, arms at his sides, expression unreadable. "You're not supposed to be out there," he said, voice low enough not to carry. "You know that." "Yes." "You also saved 2 men who would have bled out in under 3 minutes. His eyes searched hers. "I saw the report. The tourniquet placements, the packing, the occlusive seal. You did everything before Heyward even got his gloves on." She didn't answer. "You know how few corpsmen can do that under fire." His jaw tightened. "And you're not enlisted. You don't even have formal clearance." She kept silent. He stepped closer, lowering his tone further. "I don't know what you're hiding or what your background really is, but after this morning," he exhaled slowly, "people are going to start pulling threads whether you want them to or not." She met his gaze without flinching. "It won't matter." "Won't it?" he asked. "You think men who owe you their lives won't start asking why the quiet girl from aid supply moves like a combat medic with 10 years in?" Her pulse didn't change. Asking doesn't mean hearing the answer. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Not in agreement, just in recognition of a truth he didn't like. A radio crackled behind them. "Flight landing in 2." The captain turned toward the landing pad. They'll be expecting everyone lined up. Stay out of sight. If command sees you in that vest, they'll start asking questions I can't deflect." She slipped the vest off and held it at her side. He watched her for another breath, then moved on, barking orders at a group by the vehicles. Claire started toward the aid station again, but stopped when she saw Martinez heading her way. He winced slightly with every step, but pretended not to. "You're supposed to be lying down," she said. He snorted once, half amused, half irritated. "They said the same to you, I'm sure." She glanced at his bandage. "You won't heal right if you keep straining." He looked at her for a long second. He would have died. She didn't correct him, with the reality that they both would have. Martinez shifted his weight, uncertain, then spoke quietly. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. She stepped past him. "You should rest." He didn't follow. She could feel his thoughts chasing her even if his feet didn't. The first helicopter thundered overhead before she reached the station. Dust ripped across the compound, stinging exposed skin, forcing men to shield their faces. Claire paused beside a stack of crates and watched the aircraft descend. Black marked with command insignia. The side door popped open before the rotors fully slowed. A group of officers stepped out first, jackets crisp despite heat. Then him. Hartley. His uniform bore a ribbon array only years of loss and command could justify. His hair had gone grayer since she'd last seen his face in a distant hallway while ghosts trailed behind him. His eyes, sharp and scanning, moved across the courtyard without settling. In another life, one she had buried under silence and false normalcy, he had known a name she no longer carried. She turned before those eyes could land on her. She slipped around the back of the aid station and ducked into the supply room. The shelves were half filled. The air smelled of alcohol wipes and rubber and something faintly metallic. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, arms at her sides. Muffled voices echoed from the yard. Orders, salutes, boots in formation. She sat on an overturned crate and pressed her hands together tightly. He couldn't see her, he wouldn't know. The photo from Kabul was grainy. The reports were filed under a name that didn't exist anymore. The file had been sealed, scrubbed. And yet, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the tag. The letters caught in a shaft of sunlight breaking through a gap in the boards. "To stand where no one dares." She closed her hand around it. A knock on the door startled her. She hid the tag in one motion. The door opened before she could respond. Corporal Heyward peered in, awkward. They want medical personnel ready for brief updates. Command visit and all. I said you were reorganizing inventory, but he asked for you by name." Her breath stilled. "Who?" "General Hartley." The crate under her feet felt suddenly unsteady. Heyward shifted. Said he wanted to speak with the volunteer who stabilized Martinez's man. Said he heard about your work on scene. She forced her muscles to move. "I'll be there shortly." He nodded and left. The room was quiet again. She didn't move for several long heartbeats. Then she stood, tucked the tag into the deepest pocket of her pack, and walked out into the blinding morning. The general waited near the shaded edge of the briefing area, hands behind his back, speaking with the base commander. Officers stood gathered, stiff with respect and nerves. Conversations dipped when she approached, as though the dust beneath her boots made a different sound now. Hartley turned before anyone announced her. His eyes locked on hers like a memory resurfacing without permission. For a long moment, neither spoke. She didn't salute. She wasn't supposed to. He didn't reprimand her for it. His gaze dropped almost imperceptibly toward the faint outline in her pocket. Not the vest, not the pack, something older. Then his expression shifted, only slightly but enough. "You knew better than to run into fire without armor," he said quietly. The officers around them stiffened in confusion. They didn't understand the familiarity buried in his tone. Claire held his gaze without flinching. He would have died. Hartley studied her with something like anger and something like grief trying to share the same breath. "You said you were done," he murmured. "You swore you left it behind." She didn't respond. He glanced at the officers, then back at her. "We'll speak privately." Commanders exchanged puzzled glances but said nothing when he gestured for her to follow. She walked beside him, not behind. They moved past the comms tent, past the generators, past the stacks of unused concertina wire, toward the far edge of the compound where the noise faded. Only when they stood behind the vehicle bay did he speak again. "You disappeared off every record," he said, voice low. "No trace, gone." "I stayed gone," she answered. "You lied about your name." "I told the truth about my intent." He exhaled sharply. "And yet here you are again." The wind tugged at the edge of her sleeve. He looked at her, jaw tight. "I thought you were dead." She didn't blink. "I was." His eyes flicked with something like pain before it hardened over. "You can't stay anonymous now. They saw too much today." "I didn't do it to be seen." "But they did see you." His voice softened barely. "And now they'll start asking who you were before you were Claire." She looked past him at the horizon, where the ridge still smoked faintly from gunfire. He followed her gaze. "You can't run from this again." She said nothing. He stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "They called you Shadow Angel in Kabul." The name tasted like ash coming from his throat. "Do you really think a base full of Marines won't connect the story once they start digging?" She kept her eyes on the mountains. "Stories fade, people forget." He shook his head slowly. "Not this time." A radio crackled in the distance. Someone yelled instructions across the yard. The world kept moving even as the ground beneath old truths began to shift. Hartley looked at her again. "You saved one of my men today." She didn't correct him with the number. He continued, "You're not a ghost, not anymore." She met his eyes then, steady and unafraid, the sun catching faint scars along her knuckles. "No," she said quietly, "just someone who still remembers how to stop bleeding." And somewhere deep inside both of them, something long buried stirred. Not loudly. Not yet. But enough to change the air around them. Enough to make the past realize it had never really died. Why did it always feel quieter after someone said her old name? They walked back separately, not side by side. Hartley didn't look at her again, not in front of the others. His aides closed in around him as soon as they reached the main yard, feeding him briefing notes, casualty updates, inspection schedules. It allowed him to pretend she wasn't there. Claire used that distraction to disappear. Not vanish entirely, just blend back into the edges where she'd always lived. The aid station doors gave her cover. Inside, the smell of iodine and iron pushed everything else to arm's length. A medic stripped bloody gloves from his hands and dropped them into a bin. Two Marines in dusty gear waited against the far wall, one with a bruise forming across his cheek, another holding gauze to his calf. A corpsman shouted for more saline. No one stopped her when she walked past them into the back hallway. She slipped into the tiny storage alcove where extra linens and busted equipment went to be forgotten. She closed the door behind her. For the first time since the firefight, she sat. The cot in the corner sagged under her weight. Her hands rested on her knees. Her breathing was steady, but something deeper had begun to rattle, something she kept caged for years. Shadow Angel. The name hadn't been spoken aloud in a long time, not by someone who knew what it meant. She had erased it, buried it under Claire, rewrote herself as someone forgettable, someone unremarkable, someone safe. And then one man bleeding in the dirt had cracked it all open again. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. A muted voice asked for sutures. Someone coughed, wiped their nose, cursed quietly. The world kept moving because it had to. She let her head fall forward briefly, hands loosely clasped. Don't think, don't remember, don't feel. The door opened. She didn't look up immediately. Boots stopped in front of her, dusty, speckled with dried blood. Martinez. He stood there for a moment, unsure if he should speak. They're asking for you by the tents, he said eventually, debriefing for witnesses and first responders. She stayed silent. He shifted, rubbing the back of his neck. They're going to want statements about what happened out there. You were there, she said. Yeah, he paused. But I wasn't the one dragging Corporal Greene with rounds hitting 3 feet away. She didn't correct his timeline. He took her silence as permission to continue, but didn't know how. Look, he said, voice low, I don't know what your deal is. I don't know how you learned to do that out there, but they're not going to ignore it anymore. She kept her gaze on the floor. He hesitated, then asked, Are they going to pull you out? There was something in the way he asked, like it mattered to him. I haven't been told anything, she said. He nodded slowly, processing that. A medic called from the hall. Martinez, Doc wants to check that shoulder again. He didn't move. His eyes stayed on her a moment longer. You didn't flinch out there, he said quietly. Not once. She didn't respond. He swallowed and stepped back. They think you're a volunteer. Maybe you were, but you're something else too. Her lashes lowered faintly. He added almost reluctantly, They're going to find out, whether you talk or not. He left before she could reply. The door shut again. Silence returned, but not the kind that comforted. This one pressed in from every angle. She sat there 5 more minutes. Then she stood. She walked to the sink near the cot and washed her hands even though they were already clean. She dried them on a towel someone had tossed over a chair. She adjusted the sleeves of her shirt and stepped back into the hallway. The group gathered near the mess shelter wasn't formal, more like a cluster of after-action fragments. Officers asked short questions while scribbling notes. Those who were there filled in gaps, each version slightly different from the last. Someone gestured toward her. The lieutenant from the convoy beckoned. Claire, over here. Every conversation dipped for just a second before resuming. Eyes tracked her but didn't linger. She approached. The lieutenant held a pad, pen tapping against it. We're compiling timeline and proximity accounts. Just need clarity on when you exited the vehicle and your role in triage. She kept her tone even. I followed the medic. We reached the first casualty and began treatment. Then I assisted with extraction on the second. Under fire. She paused, yes. The lieutenant exchanged a look with the staff sergeant beside him. The sergeant's expression was grudging but not hostile. A second officer asked, Who authorized you to deploy forward? Claire didn't blink. Situational necessity. That's not authorization. No. A tense beat. One of the younger Marines from the convoy spoke up from a few feet away. Sir, we were getting hammered. She moved before half of us even saw where the rounds were coming from. We needed hands. The lieutenant glanced at him. That's not the point. It is to Greene, the Marine muttered, and Davis. Someone further down the cluster murmured agreement. The staff sergeant near the lieutenant's side. We'll file it under emergency medical support, at least until command weighs in. The questioning shifted. They asked about the angle of fire, the number of hostiles who dragged which casualty. She answered plainly, no detail embellished, no attempt to impress or downplay. After 15 minutes, the lieutenant closed his pad. We may need follow-up. Stay within station vicinity. She nodded and stepped back. A few Marines watched her from a table nearby, curiosity in their posture, not accusation. One whispered something to another, but when she glanced in their direction, he looked away. She left the group and returned to the aid station, not because she had orders to, but because routine anchored what chaos tried to unravel. Inside, Greene was conscious now, IV in his arm, bandages tight and clean. His breathing was steadier, though his lips were still pale. Someone sat beside his bed, head bowed, whispering under their breath, prayer or promise, she couldn't tell. Davis lay 2 beds over, eyes half open, monitors tracking pulse and oxygen levels. The chest seal she'd applied lay under layers of dressing, his breath shallow but present. Heyward stood near the supply counter. When he saw her, he hesitated, then blurted, "Look, I was out of my depth." She looked at him. "You weren't," he glanced away quickly, "that's all." She didn't reply. He seemed relieved she didn't make him finish whatever apology or confession he was fumbling toward. An hour passed in motions that felt familiar, restocking, checking vitals, updating intake notes. It could have been any day before firefight. That was the danger of war. After screams and blood, it expected you to fold blankets like nothing happened. By midday, the general's inspection turned into meetings. Command convened behind closed doors. No one outside that circle knew what was being discussed, but tension bled through the vents. She stepped outside for air. The sky was cloudless. The wind tasted of burnt metal and sand. She walked the perimeter slowly, staying near shadows cast by vehicles and tents. People gave her space, not out of fear, but because they didn't know what to say yet. She stopped near the back fence, where the earth dipped into rocky slope. Beyond that ridge, the valley twisted out of view. Somewhere along that route still lay tire tracks and blood she hadn't washed from her boots. She knelt and brushed dirt from the laces. A voice behind her, "You planning to run again?" She didn't turn. "I didn't run the first time." Hartley stood a few feet away. No aides, no staff officers, just him. He approached slowly, as though she might bolt. "You're angry," she said without looking at him. "Yes," he said simply. "Because I left. Because you let everyone believe you died." She rose from her crouch and faced him fully. "I needed to disappear." "For what purpose?" "To stop being her." His jaw flexed. "You can't erase what you were." "I wasn't trying to erase it. I was trying to survive it." For a moment, the wind was the only voice. Hartley stepped closer. "You're not entirely gone. You proved that today." "No," she said. "I proved someone was bleeding." "That's not all you proved." She didn't reply. He exhaled. "They're going to demand a background check. It's already happening. Command wants to know how a volunteer had the composure and training to treat under fire better than half our medics. Then they'll find nothing. They'll find just enough." His gaze was sharp. "Scrubbed files leave louder echoes than full ones." Her fingers twitched at her side. He lowered his voice. "Do you want me to intervene?" That caught her off guard. "Why would you?" "Because once they identify you, they'll draft you back into a system you walked away from. And this time, you won't choose your assignment." She studied him. "You think you can hide me again?" "I can try." "Why?" He looked at her like she should already know. But before he could speak, footsteps approached. A corporal ran up, saluted. "Sir, command team is ready." Hartley gave him a curt nod. The corporal jogged back. He looked at Claire one last time, not with judgment, with something closer to regret. "This isn't over, and you're not invisible anymore." She said nothing. He turned and left. She stood alone at the fence line, wind tugging strands of hair from her braid. Far across the base, the chapel bell clanged once, a call for an informal service at dusk. For the dead from earlier operations, for the wounded, for the ones whose names were spoken only in the dark. She watched the horizon while shadows lengthened. Inside her pocket, the tag pressed against her palm like a pulse she'd tried to forget. And somewhere near the hangars, a group of Marines stood in a loose circle, arguing in low voices. One of them said her name. Not Claire. The other one. The one she hadn't answered to since Cobble burned. Why did the air always change right before a secret slipped? Evening crept across the base slower than usual, stained in deep orange light that stretched shadows past the edges of tents and vehicles. The day's noise softened, engines cooling, metal clanking less, conversations fading to low hums that carried more weight than volume. Someone near the motor pool tuned a broken radio, static crackling between bursts of country music. Somewhere else, laughter tried to sound normal and didn't quite get there. Claire walked the narrow path behind the aid station toward the laundry bay. The scent of detergent mixed with dust and diesel, clinging to everything like memory. A few cots lay outside to air, sheets flapping in the dry wind. She carried 2 canvas rolls of used bandages for sterilizing, each marked in faded ink. 2 Marines passed her, their smiles awkward and short-lived. One nodded to her with a kind of respect that came too late to matter but still tried to exist. They didn't call her helper girl. Not anymore. Inside the laundry bay, a civilian worker folded blankets into neat rectangles while humming quietly. He didn't raise his head when she dropped the rolls into the bin near the sink. He'd seen her too many times to stare. She rinsed her hands, dried them on her pants, and stepped back outside. The sky was turning indigo. The call for evening prayer from a distant village outside the wire drifted faintly through the air. Some Marines paused when they heard it, not out of reverence, but because sounds from beyond the fence always made people listen differently. Claire stopped at the water tank behind the generator shed and splashed her face. The water was cold, metallic on her tongue when she took a sip from her cupped hand. For a moment, she let her eyes close. She hadn't slept since before the ambush. She didn't feel tired, just hollowed in places rest couldn't touch. Bootsteps approached from behind. "Hey." She recognized Martinez's voice before she turned. He wore a fresh bandage on his shoulder and carried a mug of what passed for coffee. His movements were slower but not hesitant. "You should get someone to look at your wrist," he said, nodding toward her hand. She glanced down. A line of dried blood stretched across her knuckles, cracked from pressure she hadn't noticed applying. "It's nothing," she said. "You keep saying that." Silence stretched between them, but not an uncomfortable one. He leaned against the metal tank beside her, taking a sip from the mug, grimacing at the taste. "They're saying what you did today was combat-level trauma care," he said. "Not field bandaging, real battlefield triage." She didn't answer. He stared into his mug. "My platoon sergeant said he's seen guys with medic tabs freeze under fire. You didn't." Still nothing. After a moment he added, more quietly, "You moved like someone who's been shot at before." Her eyes stayed on the distant mountains. "Plenty of volunteers have seen bad things." "Not like that," he said. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then he asked, "Is that why you never flinch when mortars fall?" She didn't look at him. "Flinching doesn't stop the blast." "No," he said, "but most people do it anyway." She pushed away from the tank, ready to go. "Wait." She paused. "I'm not trying to corner you," he said, "or report you, or get you in trouble. He exhaled. "I want to understand." "You don't need to." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but I think others will want to, and some won't ask gently." She studied him then, not with suspicion, more with assessment. He held her gaze, unflinching, not aggressive, just waiting. She said nothing, and he didn't push further. Instead, he handed her the mug. "You look like you haven't had anything since morning." She took it. The coffee was bitter, burnt, too hot. She didn't wince. He nodded once and walked away. When the last of the sun dropped behind the hills, the chapel bell rang once more. Not a mandatory call, more like a reminder. A habit for those who needed someone else's words to carry theirs. Claire found herself near the edge of the gathering without meaning to. A mix of Marines, medics, and a few civilians stood in a loose half-circle around a flat wooden crate that served as a podium. The chaplain rested his hand on a notebook, voice quiet, not forcing faith on anyone, just offering reflection. The names of the dead from the past week were read aloud. Greene and Davis weren't on that list. Not today. When the chaplain finished, the group thinned gradually. Some lingered, speaking in low voices or standing in silence staring at the horizon. Claire turned to leave. A voice spoke behind her, not the chaplain, not Martinez, another she recognized but hadn't expected. Captain Harlow stepped up beside her. You didn't stand with them, but you still listened. She didn't deny it. He folded his arms loosely. I've known men who walked off explosions with less control than you used applying that tourniquet. She kept her eyes ahead. That general, he said quietly, the one who got off the chopper, he looked at you like he already knew. She didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. He continued, people are starting to talk. They won't say it loud yet, but they will soon. What are they saying? That you're not who your paperwork says you are. She met his gaze then, calm, unmoved. He didn't intimidate her. Very few could anymore. Harlow studied her like a puzzle with half the edge pieces missing. I don't know what you're hiding, but whatever it is, I don't think it comes from selfish intent. A beat passed, he added, command doesn't care about intent. Before she could respond, a comm tech jogged toward them. Sir Colonel wants you in TOC. Something about escalation protocols. Harlow nodded and turned away. He paused once. Try not to disappear, not tonight. He left. She walked back toward the smaller tents behind the medical station. Lights flickered in some, others already dark. Crates sat stacked in shadows, tarps rattling softly in the wind. Near a storage pallet, low voices drifted. She recognized one immediately. Heyward. She didn't intend to listen, but their words slid through the quiet like dropped rounds. I'm telling you, she knew stuff I wasn't even trained on yet, Heyward whispered. That chest seal placement, first try, no hesitation. Another voice, the corporal who'd ridden in the truck earlier. She was moving before half of us even realized we needed a medic. Someone else murmured, she didn't even wear armor. Who the hell does that in lives? Heyward, that's not beginner instinct. That's muscle memory. A fourth voice, low and wary, you think she's prior service, special operations or something. Silence clung before someone spoke again. If she is, why hide it? Because maybe she didn't want to come back. They fell quiet as footsteps passed near them, Claire's footsteps, but they didn't know it was her. She kept walking, not changing pace. Her tent waited near the supply racks. The flap hung half open. Inside, a cot, a footlocker, and a lantern she rarely turned on. Nothing personal on the walls, nothing to suggest roots. She entered, set the mug on the ground, and knelt by the cot. She reached beneath it and pulled out the small, weathered notebook she kept hidden inside her pack when she moved from place to place. She sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it. Pages filled with numbers, dates, coordinates, names long erased from rosters, notes on techniques, pressure points, emergency field procedures drawn in neat lines, every page written by her own hand. She turned to the last entry, a message written in faded ink. Forward Aid, Kabul 2010. Her fingers brushed the line but didn't linger. She closed the book and tucked it back inside the hidden flap of her pack. Outside, laughter rose then faded. A radio played a broken melody. Someone cursed after stubbing a toe on rebar. Claire lay back on the cot. She didn't sleep. Not even when the wind died, and the silence tried to pretend nothing had changed. Hours later, past midnight, someone pounded on a tent pole 2 rows over, shouting for a medic. A fight had broken out between 2 Marines, stress, pain, exhaustion bleeding out sideways. She heard Heyward rush past her tent, half-dressed, muttering under his breath. She didn't move. Instead, she stared at the ceiling canvas where shadows shifted with lantern light through seams, tracing patterns only she could see. By dawn, 3 things had already happened. Someone sent a request to headquarters for her clearance record. Someone else tried to pull her volunteer file and found half of it missing. And a message was transmitted from an encrypted channel, routed through 2 liaison networks, to a secure desk in Virginia. The message was brief. Shadow Angel sighted, active, no longer PRESUMEDKIA. She didn't know it yet, but the past had already started walking toward her. And it wasn't coming quietly. Why did dawn always expose more than night could hide? The first rays lit the compound in pale gray, washing the tents in silence before the day's engines roared back to life. Marines moved slower in the early hours, coffee half drunk, boots not yet laced tight, rifles resting against knees while minds still replayed yesterday's echoes. Dust rose in lazy curls under the first patrols prepping vehicles. Claire sat on a crate outside the aid station, sipping from a dented canteen. Her eyes weren't tired, though she hadn't slept. She never let exhaustion show. It gave people excuses to dismiss you. She learned long ago how to wear calm like armor. The air smelled of burned fuel and antiseptic. A medic inside cursed softly as he inventoried morphine. A corporal argued with supply about rations. Voices clashed without conviction, like background static. And then the base loudspeaker cracked alive. Medical team stand by. Command briefing at 0900. All personnel prepare. It wasn't unusual for command to call medics, but the tone was different. It wasn't routine. Claire capped her canteen and rose. She stepped inside the station. Greene stirred on his cot, face still pale but alive. Davis slept under oxygen, chest rising in shallow rhythm. Marines checked on them like clockwork, whispering thanks as they left. The whispers always seemed to multiply when she was in the room. Heyward glanced at her as she passed. His eyes carried unease, not accusation, not respect, something in between. He wanted answers but feared what they might be. She walked through, gathered her pack, and stepped out toward the command building. The crowd already forming outside told her this wasn't standard. Officers lined the entrance. Marines gathered in clusters, whispering. Hartley's aides stood near the steps, scanning faces. The general himself emerged moments later, his presence stiffening the air. The base commander called everyone to attention. The speeches started, tactical reviews, logistics, upcoming patrol adjustments. Standard words dressed in heavy tones, but the way Hartley's eyes flicked over the crowd gave away what mattered. And then, a civilian contractor is to be recognized for extraordinary actions under fire yesterday. The words froze Claire mid-step. Heads turned before names were even said. She felt it before she heard it. Claire. Murmurs rose. Some nodded knowingly, others frowned. Martinez's gaze cut through the crowd, meeting hers for a half-second that felt longer. Hartley gestured, "Step forward." Every instinct screamed at her to vanish. To turn, walk away, let the moment slide into memory. But too many eyes waited. Too many questions sharpened on silence. She walked forward steady, unhurried. Hartley's expression was unreadable, but his voice carried weight. This woman crossed open fire to stabilize 2 wounded Marines, applying life-saving care under direct enemy contact. Both survived. Without her actions, they would not be standing among us. A ripple passed through the crowd. Marines shifted, glances traded. She saw Martinez lower his chin slightly, pride hidden in restraint. Hartley looked at her differently than he spoke, like every word was calculated but every thought behind them was raw. For those actions, she receives official commendation. An aide stepped forward with a small certificate inside a plastic sleeve. Hartley didn't hand it to her like routine. He looked at her with eyes that asked something else. Will you stay silent, or will you admit who you are? She took the paper, fingers brushing the edge. She said nothing. The applause was scattered, uncertain. Respect mixed with disbelief. Some clapped out of duty, others out of awe. A few didn't at all, still unsure what to make of her. She stepped back, certificate tucked under her arm. Hartley moved on to logistics updates, casualty reports, morale statements. But the air didn't return to normal. Too much had shifted. When the briefing ended, Marines clustered around, throwing questions she didn't answer. Where'd you learn that? Were you really unarmed? Why risk it? She kept moving, offering only nods. By the time she reached the edge of the compound, she felt the weight of every gaze. Recognition was no longer avoidable. Later in the mess hall, conversations dimmed when she entered. Not silence, just sharper awareness. Someone at the far table muttered, "That's her." Another whispered, "Shadow Angel." The name leaked like smoke, curling into corners. She froze for half a breath at the sound. Not because it was said, but because of who said it. An older sergeant who had no reason to know. She carried her tray past him, sat alone, ate without looking up. The food was tasteless, but she chewed steadily, forcing herself to exist as though nothing had changed. Across the hall, Martinez spoke quietly to two younger Marines. Their heads snapped toward her, then back to him, respect in their eyes. When she finished, she placed her tray away and left. Outside, the sun glared. A helicopter roared overhead, dust kicking across the yard. She shielded her eyes, watched it vanish, then turned toward her tent. The flap hung half open. Inside, the cot, the pack, the silence waiting. But when she stepped in, something was different. Her notebook was gone. She froze. The hidden flap inside her pack hung loose, not the way she'd left it. Her pulse didn't race, but it pressed, steady, controlled. She turned, scanning the compound. Who, when? Voices outside, two Marines passing. Files redacted, command wants answers. Nobody scrubs a record clean unless there's something. She closed her tent flap quietly, sat on the cot, hands clasped, elbows on knees. The notebook was more than memory, it was proof, evidence of the years she'd buried. If someone opened it, if they read the first page, they'd know. Shadow Angel wasn't rumor. Shadow Angel was her. She waited in stillness, breathing slow. Minutes stretched. Then a shadow appeared at her tent door. Martinez. He stepped in, holding something behind his back. His eyes searched hers carefully, like he wasn't sure what he wanted to find. He pulled it out. The notebook. She stared at it, unreadable. He set it on the cot between them. I didn't mean to. I was just looking for supplies, thought this was part of med stock, then I saw your handwriting. Kabul, 2010. Her silence was heavier than any weapon. He continued, softer, "It's you, isn't it? The one they call Shadow Angel." Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. He shook his head, almost in disbelief. "My squad used to trade stories about her, about you. We thought it was half myth. A medic pulling bodies out under fire, patching wounds with nothing but will. They said she died when the hospital collapsed." She took the notebook from the cot, slid it back into the pack. Her voice was steady. "She did." "No," he said, "you're sitting here." She looked at him finally. Her eyes carried the weight of years he couldn't imagine. "I left her there." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Martinez didn't move. His jaw tightened, breath slow. "You can't hide this anymore. They're already whispering." She closed the pack, then let them. He wanted to argue, to push, but something in her expression stopped him. Something that said she'd carried enough battles without adding his disbelief. He exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck. "If you don't want them to know, I'll keep quiet. But you should understand, men don't forget the one who saved them. Greene, Davis, me, we don't forget." He left without waiting for a reply. The flap fell closed behind him. She sat in the dim light, hands resting on her knees. the tag in her pocket pressed against her palm. Outside, the whispers grew louder. And far away, in an office in Virginia, a message pinged across a secure line. A colonel read it, frowned, and muttered, "She's alive." Orders began drafting. Claire didn't know it yet, but the world she escaped was already preparing to drag her back. Why did the air go still before a storm you couldn't see? The compound buzzed with the usual noise of morning, but under it ran something different, an awareness people couldn't name yet but felt all the same. Engines rumbled, boots struck gravel, radios hissed, yet conversations broke mid-sentence, glances stretched too long, and every so often someone would look toward the horizon as if expecting it to move. Claire loaded boxes of gauze into a supply crate outside the aid station, methodical and quiet. She didn't rush, didn't pause. The sounds around her passed like wind against stone. Heyward jogged across the yard, heading toward comms with a stack of binders. He glanced at her and hesitated, as though words were trying to climb out of his mouth and didn't know how. He kept going. His silence said more than any question could. From the far side of camp, a distant rotor chop rolled closer, heavy, powerful, different from the transport birds that came and went daily. Heads lifted. Martinez stepped out of the mess tent and shaded his eyes. Officers leaving the TOC slowed their stride, listening. She didn't look up. The helicopter's shadow swept across the compound seconds before the machine itself appeared above the ridgeline, sleek, dark, not marked for routine patrol or medical dust-off. A gunner on the side scanned the terrain, bored but alert. The bird descended in a controlled, almost theatrical arc, its downdraft tearing through sandbags and stray papers. Marines formed a loose perimeter. Nobody was told to. Instinct arranged bodies before words did. Claire slid the last box into the crate and stood, brushing dust from her sleeves. Her heartbeat stayed level, but something old stirred beneath her ribs, a pressure that memory rarely allowed. The helicopter settled, engines whining down, doors opened. He stepped out. General Hartley didn't wear his cap this time. His silver hair caught the sun, lines at his eyes deeper than yesterday. His stride carried neither haste nor leisure, just inevitability. 2 aides followed, along with a security officer whose gaze scanned everything except the ground beneath his feet. Conversations thinned. Marines pretended to stay busy but positioned themselves where they could see. Word traveled faster than breath. He came back for her. Hartley didn't head toward command. He didn't look for the colonel or the base sergeant major. He walked straight across the yard with the certainty of someone following a signal no one else could hear. She turned then, just enough to face him. He stopped a few feet away, eyes locked on hers. Up close, he looked exactly as she remembered him from another life. The way he carried unspoken grief like a folded flag behind his sternum. The way something in his expression always weighed what others never saw. Her voice came out steady, general. No salute, no pretense, just acknowledgement. Marines nearby held their breath, pretending not to. Hartley studied her long enough to make the silence ache. You left without debrief, without recovery clearance, without notice. She didn't flinch. I wasn't active duty. You were classified, he said. There's a difference. The security officer behind him shifted slightly. She noticed but didn't react. Hartley's tone lowered. You were declared KIA so you could disappear safely. That was the condition. Instead, you show up here under a fake file, saving Marines in the open. They were bleeding, she said simply. That's not the point. It is to me. A muscle tightened in his jaw, the way it used to when she'd argue quietly in briefing rooms filled with louder men. He nodded once to his aides. They stepped back. Walk with me, he said. She didn't move immediately. Her eyes scanned the perimeter, Martinez at the corner of the mess hall, watching, Harlow in the distance, hands behind his back, Heyward half hidden behind a generator. Then she walked. They moved along the outer edge of the compound where the razor wire met the dust. Far enough for privacy, close enough for witnesses if things went wrong. For a while neither spoke. He broke the quiet first. After Kabul, after the collapse, we spent 3 weeks confirming the dead. Your tags were found under 6 feet of debris. No body, just blood and dust and steel. She said nothing. He glanced at her. You didn't reach out. I was done, she said. You didn't get to decide that. I already did. They stopped near a low concrete barrier. The sun climbed behind them, throwing long shadows at their feet. Hartley exhaled slowly. When I saw you yesterday, I thought I was hallucinating, a ghost wearing your face, but ghosts don't stop arterial bleeds in 30 seconds. She watched him without speaking. He stepped closer, voice almost a whisper. Why here, why now? She looked past him to the mountains. I wanted anonymity, service without questions. Noise quiets when no one knows your name. It won't stay that way, he said. I know. Silence stretched, not cold but worn. He turned his gaze toward the camp. Headquarters already knows. They tracked the encrypted ping the moment your name reappeared on site logs. They think you broke protocol. They don't care why. Let them think, she said. They'll come for you. I've been taken before. He looked at her then with an expression somewhere between pride and sorrow. Shadow Angel was more than rumor, more than myth. You mattered to people who never even saw your face. I didn't do it to matter. I know. A group of Marines offloading crates glanced their way. One of them, Jones, stopped mid-step when he recognized her. He whispered something to the others. The name passed between them like contraband hope. Hartley noticed but didn't interfere. He shifted slightly. You remember Afghanistan, the evac with the children. She did, but she didn't speak it aloud. You lost 5 in that collapse, he said quietly. 2 of ours, 3 locals. Her jaw tightened. They blamed you when the report was filed, called it reckless entry under unstable structure. I fought that ruling. I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to. He paused, eyes heavy with memory. When the dust settled, you were gone. I thought maybe you knew they were going to drag you through hearings you didn't deserve. They already had, she said. He nodded slowly. You saved 37 people in 2 years, no medals, no publicity, and they still found ways to strip meaning from it. Words hovered unspoken in the air, so you walked away. He shifted to face her more directly. They'll want to reclaim you now. They'll say it's about service, about justice, about duty. Her voice was quiet steel. It's about ownership. Yes. She looked back toward the aid station. I didn't lie to them. They just stopped asking the right questions. The general's gaze softened, not weak, but worn with understanding. I didn't come to arrest you or expose you. I came because the moment I saw you alive, something in me refused to let the system swallow you again. She met his eyes finally. Then why are you here? To give you a choice before they take it. She didn't respond. Hartley's voice dropped. If you want to vanish again, I'll buy you 48 hours, maybe 72. But after that, Washington will send their own people. They won't ask permission. And if I stay, they'll reinstate what they buried, with or without your consent. She considered that in silence. The weight of past missions pressed against her chest like bandages too tight. Footsteps approached behind them, slow, uncertain. She didn't turn. Martinez stopped a few paces away. He didn't speak. Hartley's eyes flicked to him and back to her, recognizing something unspoken tying them. You've got allies here, the general said. Not all of them know why, but they do. She breathed once evenly. They don't owe me anything. They disagree. Far across the camp, a radio crackled with static before a voice broke through. Incoming patrol needs med response at the gate, non-fatal injuries, possible concussion. Heyward called out her name instinctively from the other side of camp. Not volunteer, not civilian. Just her. She turned toward the commotion. Hartley watched the way she moved, swift, certain, already halfway there without waiting for permission. "You haven't changed," he said softly. She didn't answer. As she neared the gate, Martinez followed. Two Marines supported a third with a bleeding scalp, half-conscious but upright. Heyward already had gauze ready. She reached them, sliding into motion like breath into lungs. Voices quieted around her without being told. Hands moved when she nodded. Martinez crouched beside her without hesitation. The injured Marine blinked up at her, confused. Are you the one they're talking about?" She applied pressure to the wound. "Hold still." He winced, but his breathing slowed, trusting before he understood why. Hartley stood at a distance, watching the invisible gravity she carried even when silent. One of his aides stepped close. "Sir, should we contact command with status?" Hartley didn't take his eyes off her. "Not yet." Orders said. "I know what they said." The aide hesitated but backed away. As Claire worked, Heyward finally spoke the rumor aloud, barely above breath. "Shadow Angel." She heard it but didn't look up. Martinez glanced at him, then at her, then said quietly, "Names don't change what she's doing." The Marine under her hands whispered, dazed, "Thought she was just a volunteer." Claire tied the bandage off. "Your stable, sit." He did. Those gathered around didn't leave. They lingered, not to stare, but because proximity to her steadied them. Hartley knew then that whatever came next wouldn't be controlled by paperwork or rank alone. Too many eyes had seen. Too many hands had been pulled back from the edge by someone they were never supposed to meet. She rose, wiping blood on a cloth, her expression unreadable. Martinez spoke low enough only she could hear. "You won't be alone in this." She didn't say thank you. But she didn't walk away from him either. Across the compound, a communication tech sprinted toward the general with a sat phone in hand. "Sir, HQ is on secure line. They want confirmation of contact." Hartley watched Claire for a moment longer. Then he told the aide, "Tell them they'll get my report when I'm finished." "When will that be, sir?" He didn't blink. "When she decides." The tech hesitated, then nodded and ran back. Claire looked over then, their eyes meeting across 10 yards of dust and blood and unspoken history. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The choice he'd mentioned wasn't a future threat. It was already here. And whatever she chose, the world she escaped was no longer pretending not to recognize her. Why do some choices feel like they were made long before you ever speak them? The light shifted across the compound as afternoon crept toward evening, dragging long shadows over stacked crates and sun-bleached earth. Conversations that had once flowed without caution had thinned into watchfulness. The air itself seemed to listen. Claire stood beside the aid station, washing her hands in a shallow basin stained by dried iodine and dust. Martinez stood a few feet away, saying nothing, only tracking the perimeter the way someone does when waiting for impact. Across the compound, General Hartley finished a call near the communications shed. His voice had been low, final, and edged with something no one could name without knowing the history he carried. When he stepped out, the sunlight caught on the stars at his collar like a warning. She didn't look away from the water when he approached. "They're pushing for immediate retrieval," he said, voice quiet, stripped of the formality others heard from him. "Orders on standby. Extraction crew is assembling in Bagram." She didn't dry her hands. "Your file resurfaced somewhere deep," he continued. "People who buried your name aren't the same ones pulling the strings now. They think resurrecting you makes you theirs again." "It never did," she said. He didn't deny it. Martinez drew closer, folding his arms. "Are they here for charges, detainment?" Hartley shook his head. No, they want to reinstate her as active asset. The word asset tasted like metal in the air. Martinez's jaw tightened, against her will. They won't phrase it that way, Hartley said. They'll call it national interest. She finally turned, water dripping from her fingers. They'll try to pull me back in. They already think they have, he replied. A long silence stretched between them, like a memory crossing time. From somewhere across the yard, Greene hobbled into view, arms still bound, Davis following slowly, leaning on a crutch one of the corpsmen had loaned him. They walked toward her without hesitation. Not to plead, not to question, just to stand near the gravity that steadied their worst day. Heyward trailed behind them, alert, loyal to something he didn't yet understand. The general watched them gather, then glanced back toward the helipad where his own transport now rested with engine idling. Dust gathered around its skids like breath held too long. "You can go with me," he said. Not a command, almost a shelter. "I can shield you for a few days, buy time. After that, someone higher will intervene." "And the other option?" she asked. "Run before command fixes its grip." He didn't add what they both knew. Once reactivated under classified authority, there would be no resignation, no refusal. The system she walked away from would break bone to reclaim its myth. Footsteps pounded along the side path. The colonel arrived, breath short, face tight. "Sir, we need to talk in private." Hartley didn't look away from Claire. "No, we don't." The colonel hesitated, eyes flicking to her, then back. "They're requesting confirmation of extraction target status. They want acknowledgement of identity." "They'll get my voice when I choose to use it," Hartley said, steel threading through calm. The colonel stepped closer, lowering his tone. "Sir, you can't obstruct direct orders." "I'm not obstructing, I'm pausing." Pausing could be interpreted as non-compliant. Hartley's gaze didn't waver. Interpretation is not binding. The colonel's eyes hardened, but he stepped back. Claire watched without expression. The argument wasn't about her voice. It was about ownership of her silence. Martinez glanced at her. "What do you want?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she scanned the compound. Every person within visual reach pretended not to watch while watching. The whisper of Shadow Angel had moved through the base like a story meeting the ears of those who needed it. Davis stopped a few feet away. He met her eyes with quiet gravity. "We owe you our lives. If they try to take you without choice, we don't stand down." She didn't want gratitude. She wanted distance. But their words planted themselves in ground she thought she'd stopped caring about. Greene stepped forward too, voice rough but sure. "You didn't disappear when bullets found us. We're not disappearing now." She could have told them not to say that. Could have reminded them the military does not tolerate disobedience wrapped in loyalty. But she didn't. Hartley watched her, as if reading the path winding behind her eyes. "You can walk now," he said softly. "Choose your own vanishing, not the one they'll script." "And if I stay?" she asked. "Then you face a storm built from the wreckage you left behind." She considered that. The basin behind her reflected a distorted glimpse of sky, fractured by ripples where her fingers had touched. Heyward crossed his arms, looking at the general. "If she goes, they'll hunt her. If she stays, they'll cage her." Hartley nodded. "That's the shape of it." Martinez took a breath. "What if she doesn't leave and doesn't surrender?" Hartley's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then she stands in the open, and everyone who's seen what she is must decide whether to step forward or step aside." A distant boom echoed from beyond the walls, an IED test detonation or a controlled breach drill. The sound rippled through the ground and up into the ribcage like a reminder that wars don't pause just because old ghosts rise. The colonel stalked off toward the TOC, muttering orders over the radio, trying to reassert control over a situation that no longer fit protocol. The security officer by the helicopter tapped his earpiece but didn't approach. Even he sensed a line he wasn't ready to cross. Hartley spoke again, low. "If you want me to tell them you died again, I can. I can bury your footprint one last time." She shook her head. "Not this time." "Then choose." She looked past the walls, beyond the tents, past the peaks scarring the horizon. The version of herself that had been left in Kabul stirred faintly, not in pain, but in warning. Martinez stepped closer. "If you walk out of this base alone, where do you go?" She didn't know. Or maybe she did, but the knowing hurt too much to shape into words. Hartley read the hesitation differently. "They'll expect you to vanish. That's the path they'll prepare to chase." Greene frowned. "Then don't vanish." Davis nodded, leaning heavier on his crutch. "Let them see what standing looks like." The general studied them. "You don't fully understand what you're asking her to face." "We're not asking her to face it alone," Martinez said. Hartley's gaze shifted to Claire. "Do you trust them?" Trust was not a word she let herself use, but she didn't look away. "They bleed like I do," she said. That was enough. Hartley turned toward the awaiting aircraft. "They'll escalate by nightfall. Intel teams, handlers, legal pressure. Once I report, they'll assume compliance." "Then don't report," Martinez said. Hartley's lips pressed into a thin line. "Command will assume defiance." "And?" Greene asked. The general almost smiled at the audacity in the question. "And they'll send someone with less patience than me." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Claire spoke. "I'll stay until I decide otherwise." It wasn't loud, but it rippled outward like a signal. The general inclined his head. "Then I stay long enough to delay the hammer." "You could get burned for it," Martinez said. Hartley glanced at Claire. "She carried the burn alone once. I can carry a sliver now." The helicopter pilot called out from the cockpit, impatient. Hartley ignored him. The sun began its slow descent, painting the horizon in muted flame. The compound shifted again, no longer uncertain, only waiting. Hartley spoke quietly to her before stepping back. "They'll reach for you with force or praise. Both are shackles. Decide what freedom is before they name it for you." She didn't respond. He returned to the aircraft without ceremony. The rotors spun up, dust spiraling into the air. People shielded their faces as the helicopter lifted, climbing away from the compound with a kind of reluctant weight. Claire stood in the settling dust, unmoved by the roar. Martinez turned to her. "What now?" She bent, picked up her pack, and slung it over her shoulder. "I work." Heyward blinked. "You're still on shift." She didn't answer. She was already walking toward the medical tent. Greene watched her go, then looked at Davis. Davis looked at Martinez. Martinez watched the gate, then nodded to no one and followed her. As night crept in, rumors turned into quiet conviction. No official orders were read aloud. No chains raised. No cage appeared. But far beyond the wire, decisions churned. Men in uniforms and suits debated a ghost who wasn't supposed to breathe, whose name was once erased to protect her, then to own her, and now to retrieve her. Inside the tent, Claire sat on the edge of her cot. She reached into her pack, pulled out her notebook, and opened to the first page. Cobble, blood, steel, dust, voices that never got saved. She didn't close it this time. The wind rattled the canvas. Martinez waited outside, leaning against a supply crate, arms crossed, eyes tracking anyone who walked too close. Nobody spoke the name Shadow Angel out loud anymore. Not out of fear. Out of something else. Recognition. Outside, the chaplain's bell rang once in the dark, unannounced, unanswered, unnecessary. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.